In this lesson, we're going to continue our conversation about factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient is not 1. And we've already looked at the FOIL or the guess and check method, but now we're going to look at another method called the AC method. So to get us started, let's look at our key terms. The first one, factor out a common factor. You always want to look for that first. That's a GCF. Multiply the leading coefficient A. In other words, it's the number in the front. And the constant C. Try to factor the product AC so that the sum of the factors is B. Then you split the middle term, you factor by grouping, and then you check by multiplying. So in these two problems, now I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. Now in this problem you'll notice, well, that's not a trinomial, and it says note that the middle term has already been split. So you could combine those and it would be 7x. So this is coming from x squared plus 7x plus 12. And they've split the middle term, or substituted 4x plus 3x in for 7x. Because then what we do is we factor by grouping. So when we factor by grouping, we're going to look at the first two terms, and I'm going to factor a GCF out of those two terms, which x squared plus 4x, so we can factor out an x. What's left over? Well, x plus 4. Now let's look at the back half of our polynomial. We have that positive 3x and a positive 12. They have a 3 in common, so I can factor that out. And what's left over? X plus 4. Now I have gone from 4 terms to 2 terms. Here's my 2 terms. What do my 2 terms have in common? Well, they have the x plus 4 in common. If you factor an x plus 4 out of both, if I factor it out of the first term, I'm left with x. And if I factor it out of the second term, I'm left with a positive 3. So final answer, x plus 4 and x plus 3. So we did factor by grouping. Now let's look at the next one. We're going to do the same thing. It's 4 terms, so we factor by grouping. 6x squared plus 4x, so that would leave me 2x. If I factor a 2x out of both, I'm left with 3x plus 2. If I look at the back half of my polynomial, 15x and 10, I can factor a 5 out of both of those, and I'm left with 3x plus 2. And now what do my 2 new terms have in common? Well, they have the 3x plus 2 in common. And what's left over? Well, 2x plus 5. So I want to show you actually, while we're on this same problem, another way that you could actually do this. Now we did factor by grouping. Another way, I like to call it my box method. I have 4 terms. I'm going to split a box into 4 parts. I'm going to put in my first term, and then I'm going to put in my 4x, and I'm going to put in 15x, and I'm going to put in 10. What I like to do is look at each column and each row and identify the greatest common factor in each column and each row. So if I look at my first row, 6x squared and 4x, what is the greatest common factor? Well, it's 2x. What is the greatest common factor in my 15x plus 10? Well, a 5. So I've done my 2 rows. Now let's do the 2 columns. 6x squared and 15x, well, the numbers both have a 3 in common, and they both have at least an x. And my 4x and my 10, all they have is a 2. Do you notice anything between what my final answer was when I did the grouping method and my GCFs of my rows and my columns? Well, my top I have 3x, that's a positive 2, so that's a plus 2. Down the side I have 2x, and that's a positive 5. There are my binomials that I got when I did it this way. So box method and factor by grouping gives you the same result. So that's kind of nice. I find the box method I don't have to do as many steps, but it's up to you. So we have now factoring by the FOIL method, guess and check. We have factor by grouping, and now we have factor by box method. So it's just whichever method you prefer. So let's look at a clean problem. Let's just take this top problem. And because it's written in a weird order, I do want to rewrite it first. So I'm going to rewrite it as negative 2a squared minus 5a plus 3. I'm going to factor out my negative 1. That's going to leave me 2a plus 5, squared, plus 5a minus 3. So now if you're doing factoring by doing what we call the AC method, then you're going to multiply the 2 times the negative 3. And your AC is going to be negative 6. So now you need factors of negative 6 that combine for 5. So what is that going to be? Well, we would need, you could have factors of 6 are 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. But you have to keep in mind your signs. We know that because the second sign is a negative, we know that our signs have to be different. So I need a 1 and a 6 or a 2 and a 3, but my signs have to be different. So we're not going to have the 2 and the 3, because the only way we can get a positive 5 if we add those is if both of them are positive, so that pair is not going to work. So you know it's going to have to be the 1 and the 6. In order to get a positive 5, your negative is going to have to go on the 1. So if we're doing AC method, what we have to do is we have to rewrite our trinomial but instead of positive 5a, we're going to replace it with a negative 1a and a positive 6a, and then we have the minus 3. And then we can do factor by grouping. So I'm going to need to group my first 2 terms, and I'm going to put in some squared brackets here. So my first 2 terms of 2a squared minus 1a, so I'm going to look at that. That's a group, and then my second group is the plus 6a minus 3. So my GCF in my first group looks like I'm just going to have an a, and then I'm going to have 2a minus 1. In my second group, I'm going to have a positive 2, which is going to leave me 3a, not positive 2, let's try positive 3. So it's going to leave me 2a minus 1. So now I have negative 1. What do those 2 terms have in common? Well, they have the 2a minus 1 And then what's left over? Well, a plus 3. So there's my final answer. Now that's using the AC method. If I do the box method, very similar method. I know there's going to be 4 terms. I know that my first term is 2a squared, and I know that my last term is a negative 3. The question is, okay, I need factors of negative 6, because remember that's my AC. I'm still going to use that number that add up to the positive 5. And remember I picked a negative 1 and a positive 6. So negative 1a, positive 6a. So I'm using the same terms as I did when I originally rewrote the problem from 3 terms to 4 terms. But now I'm going to just find my GCFs of my rows and my columns. So I'm going to do my rows first, and it doesn't matter in what order. Looks like I would get an A going across between 2a squared minus 1a. Between 6a minus 3, that's just going to be a 3, and it's a positive 3, so I'll put a plus in front of it. Now let's do my columns, 2a squared and 6a, that's going to be 2a. And then negative 1a, negative 3, well they're both negative, so I know I'm going to have a negative in common. And that looks like it's about it, so looks like the only thing they have in common is 1, because they're both prime. So I have 2a minus 1, and I have my a plus 3, just like I had in my original problem. Don't forget that we did factor out that negative 1 from the very beginning, so I have my 2a minus 1, my a plus 3, and my negative 1. So now that you've seen 3 methods, again, you're going to want to pick a method that works best for you, whether it's box method, AC method, or the FOIL guess and check method. And factoring trinomials just takes practice, but keep in mind you can always double check your work by multiplying them back through to making sure you got the original problem.